What's going on, guys? Today I'm going to explain every founding titan in the history of Attack on Titan. At its full potential, this shifter is pretty much invincible as it has control over every subject of Ymir, not to mention all titans and titan shifters. For 100 years its powers were severely weakened due to the vow-renouncing war, but luckily for Eren that vow only affects people who have royal blood. As a result, he can use its true abilities when the right conditions are met, which is unlike most of his recent predecessors. By my count, there are 10 characters who have used the Founder's power that we know of, and in this video I'll be going through the details of each one. In the process we'll discuss the different ways they've used it, and where the power of the Titans even comes from, but spoiler warning ahead for the second half of the final season. If you're interested in more content like this, then do check out my Attack on Titan playlist, since I've now done a video on all of the 9 shifters. Okay, so the first person on this list is Ymir Fritz, who was the original founding titan from nearly 2000 years ago. For a long time it was speculated that her abilities came from some kind of deal with the devil, but I would argue the truth is even more bizarre. In the beginning, Ymir was a powerless child from a random village, however one day her people were attacked by a tribe known as the Eldians. This tribe was led by a man called Karl Fritz, and they proceeded to kill Ymir's parents, cut out her tongue, and capture her as a slave for good measure. Soon afterwards she was made to perform various tasks for the Eldians alongside the other slaves, and this included things like transporting jugs of water and looking after the pigs. On one fateful day, she intentionally left the gate of the pig pen open, allowing one of the pigs to escape. And this decision, although it seemed harmless at first, unfortunately that choice would lead to billions and billions of deaths. By letting the animal go, she was almost immediately blamed for it, and Eldian soldiers were sent by Fritz to chase her through the forest. Even though the situation seemed hopeless, a wounded Ymir continued to stumble forward to survive, and this is where we come to the origin of the Titans. In chapter 137, Zeke gave Armin a lesson about how life on Earth began, and during that monologue we saw these organisms in the sea. The one on the left made a brief appearance during the season 2 opening, but the creature in the center is the real one we need to talk about. This type of worm is referred to as hallucigenia, which is an extinct species that existed hundreds of millions of years ago in the real world. In the Attack on Titan universe though, a large mutated version of this creature existed during Ymir's lifetime, and it had the power to largen other things. Within the Eldian forest there was a massive tree that stood high above all others, and its size was likely caused by the hallucigenia living underneath it. Of course Ymir herself had no reason to suspect anything, so she walked into this tree thinking she'd have a place to hide, but soon fell down into the water below. As she desperately struggled for breath, the mutant worm quickly approached her and fused itself into her spine. This merging of human and hallucigenia is what led to the creation of the first founding titan, with her invincible body towering over everything in sight. In terms of her design, this original titan had distinctive features that we don't often see, like her protruding ribs and the fact her skull has no flesh whatsoever. While there is no official confirmation on her size, I'd estimate that she's at least taller than the Colossal, although let me know in the comments what you think her exact height might be. Now, despite her newfound power, Ymir returned to serve Karl Fritz in what was a strange turn of events. You'd assume she'd want revenge for him enslaving her and destroying her hometown, but instead she went on to obey him as a titan for the following 13 years. Her titan body also helped to build roads, bridges, and anything useful to LD's expansion, but importantly she didn't have access to the coordinates' full abilities. This will become clearer as the video goes on, but most of the Founder's powers only work on subjects of Ymir, who are the people descended from Ymir herself. Regular human beings are totally unaffected by things like memory manipulation, for example, so at this point in history she couldn't use its true potential. Regardless of that, the Eldian Empire was still able to expand at a ridiculously fast rate, and King Fritz became a very powerful individual. Ymir would go on to have 3 of his children over the years, with their names being Maria, Rose, and Sheena, which may sound familiar because the walls on Paradise were named after them. On the day their mother died, the king was addressing his soldiers in the military when one of them rose up and straight up tried to assassinate him. He threw a spear at Fritz with pinpoint accuracy, but Ymir herself jumped in the way and took the fatal blow. While this was a serious injury, it's conceivable that a Titan shifter should be able to survive this as long as they have the will to live. It's probable that Ymir's will to live vanished when she looked up at King Fritz, as the two of them made direct eye contact after she was attacked. In that moment, her daughters were crying, but the king himself showed no emotion despite the fact she just saved his life. He simply told her to stand up and get back to work, and only when she heard this did her eyes begin to close. Her soul was reborn in what we now know to be the past dimension, and from there she would have probably the worst job of all time. In all the times people have been using the Titans, it was Ymir who was creating those Titan bodies out of sand and then sending the flesh and bones to that person through paths. In the final chapter, Armin questioned why Ymir would continue to obey Fritz and do all these things for 2000 years, with Eren confirming it was because she loved him. Clearly we know the king did not love her back, but in dying she still followed his final order to work because she felt connected to the world she left behind. Before we move on to the next founding titan, we should probably mention the Curse of Ymir, which is something that affects all Titan shifters. Since she died 13 years after getting her Titan, none of her descendants are able to surpass that length of time, with their bodies deteriorating when the time gets closer. Admittedly, this affects different people in different ways, as Grisha Yeager looked pretty normal when his time was about to run out, whereas Uri Reiss was in his 30s looking like he was about to drop dead. It's unclear why exactly the Curse of Ymir exists. I mean, does Ymir intentionally make that happen, or is it the will of the Coordinate? I mean, we just don't know, but either way, it's an unavoidable thing that every shifter goes through. With that said, the second founding titan we know about is one of Ymir's daughters, and I'm going to explain how this led to the creation of the present-day royal bloodline. After Ymir's death, Fritz was desperate for the Titans not to disappear, so he forced his daughters to eat every last piece of her body. This is similar to how people in the present will turn into pure Titans before eating a shifter, but the main thing they have in common is that you need to eat the spine. The spine is of course where the hallucigenia first connected to Ymir, so by Maria, Rose and Sheena eating it, the Titan powers were split between them. Two of them would have inherited hybrid Titans that are a mix of the 8 shifters we know today, but only one child would have inherited the true founding Titan. As Gabby said, this ancient worm is the Coordinate, so it lived on inside whichever sister had the founder, while the other 2 shifters were simply connected to it. This ties into the topic of the royal bloodline, which has always been one of the more convoluted aspects of this series. By now we should know that only those with royal blood can activate the founder's true potential by themselves, whereas for normies like Eren there are more steps involved. The problem with this is that if you go all the way back, every subject of Ymir derives from these 2 common ancestors, meaning that, whichever Eldian you're looking at, they all have Fritz's blood inside them no matter how small it may be. Why is it then that Eldians like Zeke are considered to be royalty, whereas everyone else doesn't get those same benefits? One line of thinking is that maybe not all of the daughters were Fritz's children, although I personally doubt that theory because, he clearly thought they were his daughters, and it's inconceivable that Ymir would cheat. Therefore, my own theory as to why certain characters have royal blood can be traced back to this moment in the past dimension. Here we see the Coordinate in the center, and out of it are 3 separate paths, each one representing Maria, Rose and Sheena respectively. Although all 3 of them technically have royal blood, like I said earlier, only one of these daughters inherited the founder's power and carried on the Fritz family name. Purely for example, if we assume that Maria is the sister that had the founding Titan, her children and her children's children would be the ones that Ymir considered to be royal blooded, since that offshoot of the family would repeatedly go to paths and tell her what to do. It was individuals from their specific branch of the family that gave Ymir orders for the next 2,000 years, and this lineage continued all the way up until Historia and Zeke. No matter how many subjects of Ymir there might be, it all still traces back to these 3 branches, so I feel like this could explain the difference between who Ymir does and doesn't choose to obey. I suspect that when an Eldian like Grisha has a baby with a royal, that child is added to Maria's branch of the tree, but in any other scenario a child is born to the Rose or Sheena path instead. Anyway, the third founding titan in this video was an Eldian king from 600 years before the present day of the series. Sava spoke about this king in season 4 and how he used the Coordinate to alter the bodies of every subject of Ymir. At the time, the world was being ravaged by a deadly disease, but overnight the king redesigned the bodies of millions of Eldians so that they were all totally immune. This body modification is one of the founder's most wide-ranging abilities, and unsurprisingly it has also been used to create pure titans throughout history. Zeke's power to make pure titans himself is a lesser version of that same ability, since his scream only works on those who've ingested his spinal fluid. The 4th founder we know is Karl Fritz, who was the 145th king of the Eldian Empire, and the one who ruined everything. Don't get me wrong, by now the Eldians had been a menace to the world for a long time, but Karl's solution to this problem was less than ideal. Just ask anyone who died in the first 3 seasons. During Willy Tybur's big production, he got an actor to play the role of Fritz, and this speech gave us an insight into the former king's mentality. Karl was a guy who felt immense guilt for the sins of the Eldian race, since for years they'd been forcibly spreading the blood of Ymir across the globe, and then using titans to wipe out entire groups of people. He felt immense sympathy for Marley in particular, and believed that nothing Eldia could do could atone for the lives they've destroyed. To add to all of this, the Great Titan War was also raging on during Karl's lifetime, in which the noble families of Eldia had a civil war using the other 8 Titan shifters. This was essentially the final straw for him, as the infighting made him realize that the Titan powers, especially the founder, must be kept out of human hands. His solution to all of this began when he inherited the Coordinate himself, as he conspired to take down the Eldian Empire. There were many different stages to Fritz's plan, but it started when he guaranteed the Tiber family's safety in exchange for them helping Marley to take back control. Together they made up a fake Marleyan hero named Helos, who would go on to be known as the one who defeated Eldia with the help of the Tibers. The story goes that Helos manipulated different noble families into killing each other, and then somehow forced Fritz to retreat to Paradise Island. In reality, the king wanted to flee to the island, and he brought with him as many Eldians as he could, not to mention many non-subjects of Ymir, such as the Asian clan and also those who would later be known as nobles. It goes without saying that he would still leave many of his people behind on the continent, as well as members of the royal family who would later be whittled down to just Zeke. In the king's absence, the Eldian Empire continued to crumble, and the Tibers assisted Marley in stealing 7 of the 9 shifters for itself, with the Attack Titan being the only one to evade capture. Back on the island itself, Fritz wanted to create a peaceful society free of war, and he used the Founder's power to try and make that a reality. His first action was to materialize tens of millions of Colossus Titans, which I imagine took Ymir quite a long time in paths. When those Titans were in position, Karl utilized their hardening ability to erect the 3 walls we know today, and their names were of course Maria, Rose and Sheena. Within these walls is where his new society would be made to live, but in true Thanos style, the king didn't think it could be paradise if people still remembered what existed before. That's why he transformed into his Founding Titan and erased the memories of nearly all people on the island. He made them believe they were the last survivors of the human race, and that these walls were constructed to protect them from the Titans. On the flip side though, the Ackermans were among a select group of families unaffected by the king's memory manipulation. Their knowledge of the outside world was a threat to the paradise that Karl was trying to create, so he offered them noble status and privilege to guarantee their silence. While some bloodlines accepted this offer, the Ackermans and Asians rejected it as they disagreed with the king's ideology. The king did not take this well, as you can understand, and to preserve his definition of peace, Karl had them hunted down through the generations until there were virtually none left, hence why there is only one half Asian and a handful of Ackermans in the present day. Now, in an act of self-protection, the king then changed the royal family's name from Fritz to Reiss, and then he had a random noble family take on the Fritz name instead. The new Fritz family would pretend to be the monarchs for the next 100 years, but in reality it would be the Reisses who were really in charge behind the scenes. Sometime after this, Karl used his abilities again to create the Reiss Chapel, which is where the royals passed on the coordinate for generations, at least until Grisha rudely interrupted them. Overall, the king's mindset was that Eldia's past crimes could never be forgiven, and that he would accept it if Marley one day came to destroy the island. His dream was to live in a peaceful society until that day comes, and by making a vow to renounce war, future Founding Titans were possessed by that same ideology. Last thing to mention on Karl is that he made a threat to the world that he would activate the rumbling if they tried to attack. However, as Willy Tybur revealed, that was just an empty threat, and he only said it to prolong the peace on Paradise. Fast forward many decades later, and the next founder we saw was an unnamed man from the royal family. He was the father to both Rod and Uri Reiss, both of whom would constantly beg him to eradicate the pure Titans. Due to the vow-renouncing war, he never once made an attempt to do this, which is something his sons couldn't understand. Based on his personal library here, he clearly enjoyed reading, but when Rod bothered him too much, he'd lock his son inside a dungeon. Doesn't really seem like a proportionate response, but you know, if you're the king of the walls, I guess you can do what you want. Eventually the time came for one of his sons to become the next founder, and Uri was certain he'd be able to do what his father couldn't. Sadly though, after inheriting this Titan, he was immediately consumed by Karl Fritz's vow-renouncing war, and never spoke again about destroying the Titans outside the walls. In a flashback scene, we got a small look at the design of his founding Titan, although the form was mostly incomplete. On this day, the two Reiss brothers had been traveling together, but were ambushed by Kenny Ackerman, who was given their location by a royal government official. Knowing they had been betrayed by someone, the king was eager to find out who told Kenny where they'd be, but he couldn't use the founder's power to make him talk. As an Ackerman, Kenny was immune from those type of mind games, which like I said is part of the reason they were hunted down and persecuted. Uri therefore understood why someone from that clan would want to kill him, which is why even with a knife in his arm, it was the king who apologized and bowed down. Following this encounter, the two of them actually became friends, with Uri putting an end to the Ackerman's persecution, at least in an official capacity. He then hired Kenny to be a fixer for the Reiss family, and over the years it's implied the two of them were quite candid with each other, with the king even telling him that his power was going to be transferred. During his time as the Founding Titan, Uri frequently gave sermons about peace to those within his inner circle, including the interior police and of course Kenny. As his 13 years came closer to an end, the curse of Ymir really started to make him look like an old man. He had grey hair, wrinkles, and a walking stick, which means his Titan regeneration must have also been getting really slow with old age. One interesting thing about Uri is that he predicted the world would be destroyed in the not too distant future, and at first I thought this statement referred to the warriors invading the island. Given the context we have now though, it's likely Isayama wrote this line with the rumbling on his mind instead. Moving on, Frieda Reiss became the new Founding Titan in the year 842, and just like Uri, she thought she could overcome the will of Karl Fritz. Spoiler alert, she couldn't, but let's explain who she is in the first place. By all accounts, Frieda was one of the nicest characters in the series, and was the eldest daughter of Rod Reiss. Whereas Rod completely ignored the existence of his youngest child Historia, it was Frieda that went out of her way to teach the girl to read, write, and ride horses. In many ways, it was her influence that made Historia the humble person she became, and at the age of 15, Frieda inherited the Founding Titan. Choosing to eat your uncle is never an easy decision, but she did it to save humanity from the Titans because, like I said, she thought she could override the vow-renouncing war. After gaining the Founder, she would begin to give speeches like her uncle used to do, and in her spare time she'd play with Historia and then wipe her memory afterwards. She did this to protect her younger half-sister, since being of royal blood does tend to put a target on someone's back. Historian noted how sometimes Frieda would act like a totally different person, and these moments were when the king's will was the strongest. The best example, in my opinion, is when Grisha confronted her in the Reiss Chapel, because Frieda's entire speech was literally spoken as if it was Karl Fritz himself. In terms of her founding titan's design, she didn't have the exposed ribs or long arms of her predecessors, and her height was slightly shorter than Grisha's attack titan. As a result of the vow-renouncing war, she was defeated pretty easily by Grisha, even though her shifter is in theory meant to be unbeatable. On a random note, there was that one occasion when Eren witnessed a memory of Frieda brushing her hair, and the anime definitely made it seem like she saw him looking at her. Whether she actually did or not is up for debate, because as Grisha said, she never really had access to the founder's full potential, given that the vow-renouncing war severely limits what she can do. Following that fight, the 8th founder in this video is of course Grisha Yeager, who is responsible for merging the attack titan and the founding titan into one body. All things considered, he had this power for a really short time, as he stole it from Frieda and then forcibly made Eren eat him not long after that. There was never really a scenario in which Grisha could have actually used the coordinate, but rather his sole purpose was to transfer the power from the Reiss family to the Yeagers. Being an Eldian restorationist, he had wanted this titan taken from the royal family for a long time, but I'm sure he never imagined it would be up to him, given that he wanted his wife to take it at first and then he wanted his son to take it, but no, he ended up being the one trusted to do it. To his credit, he did locate the true royal family after only a few years, which when you compare that to Marley's 4 warriors, I mean, first of all, it's way more impressive, and I kind of think they might have been more successful if they sent experienced adults like Grisha or people like that, rather than 12-year-old kids. Anyway, on the first occasion he visited the Reiss Chapel, he chose not to confront the royals for the sake of his family, but he would eventually return on the day Marley invaded. As I explained in my video about every attack titan, it was Eren from the future that motivated Grisha to kill Frieda in the first place, but that wouldn't have been possible without the unknowing help of Grisha's first son. Zeke Yeager is the next person on this list to have used the founder's power, and he was the first royal in over a century to have access to its full potential. While it is true that he didn't have a physical founding titan body, his use of its power is still an essential part of the story that can't be overlooked. A while ago, it was established that if a titan of royal blood makes contact with the founder, then that person can get around its limitations. We witnessed this firsthand when Eren commanded an army of pure titans after touching down Ymir Fritz, despite the fact he's a regular Eldian who shouldn't be able to use the coordinate. The second time Eren touched a royal-blooded titan was when his decapitated head fell into Zeke's hands, but this time there was a twist. Unlike previous royals, Zeke arrived here without being tainted by the will of King Fritz, meaning he was free to command Ymir however he wanted. After spending a long time in this realm before Eren arrived, he learnt about the extent of Ymir's abilities and how she's a slave to royal-blooded individuals. On a basic level, whoever Ymir listens to is the one that controls the founder, and she initially listened to Zeke because he has royal blood. In his very brief time in charge of the founder, the eldest Yeager brother tried to use this power for 4 main things. Number 1 is that he created these easily breakable chains around his body, as he wanted to pretend he was trapped by the vow to renounce war. This was part of Zeke's test to see if Eren was really on his side, and it was a test that was very quickly failed. Number 2 is that he made some actual chains to restrict Eren, and these ones were so tough that Eren had to rip his thumbs off to break free. The third and most game-changing use of this power was when he physically took his brother into their father's memories, since he was trying to prove that Grisha had brainwashed Eren. By doing this, Zeke unknowingly gave his brother the chance to talk to the memory of their father, and then send that message back to the real Grisha in the past. The real Grisha was able to see those memories due to the future memory inheritance of the attack titan, but Zeke never knew this could happen because he didn't know about that ability. In this way, Eren was able to manipulate the past and make his father kill Frieda. However, it was only possible because Zeke took Eren into that memory in the first place. The fourth way Zeke tried to use the founder was more of a fail, as he commanded Ymir to sterilize all Eldians across the globe. This had been his plan since he was a teenager, yet it didn't work out because Eren spoke to the founder as a person, convincing Ymir that she should choose what happens next, rather than simply being a slave to the royal bloodline. Zeke desperately tried to convince her to still follow him, but by then she had already chosen Eren's side, and the founder's power awakened in him soon afterwards. It's crazy how all those events happened in a split second in reality, but in the past dimension it was clearly a notable period of time. In any case, the last founding titan is Eren Yeager, who is a character that needs no introduction. With Ymir on his side, he was able to unleash the full power of the coordinate in what was the biggest spectacle we've ever seen. His first action was to undo all Titan hardening in the world, which included not just the walls on Paradise, but also the Armor Titan's armor fell apart, and Annie's crystal came undone as well. He then used the founding titan in a way we've never seen before, since he telepathically sent a message to every Eldian on the planet. Millions upon millions of subjects were summoned to the past dimension regardless of where they were in the real world, and Eren proceeded to tell them his intention to end life outside the walls. This telepathic ability was then put to use even further, as Eren later spent time visiting each of his friends to say goodbye. During this goodbye tour, he showed Armin the amazing natural landscapes that they spoke about when they were kids, and for Mikasa he made a world in which they lived in a cabin in the woods. One thing that's unclear is whether Eren is able to just create these environments literally out of nothing, or if he's simply showing them memories from Eldians of the past, in a similar way to how Zeke took them into Grisha's memories. Regardless of the way he does it, it's possible these two could have spent a longer time in paths than what we saw in the final chapter, given that time passes faster in there compared to the real world. Speaking of time, Eren noted how the Founder's powers make him experience the past, present and future simultaneously. This is why he's unable to deviate from the end result where he dies, because it's all a fixed timeline that can only have one outcome. This is where we get to one of his most controversial uses of the Founding Titan, which was Eren influencing the past to make sure the events of the first episode happened. This reveal was foreshadowed back in season 4, when the Ymir Fritz Titan bizarrely walked straight past Bertolt, despite being a pure Titan. These paths transcend time itself, so he used this ability to preserve the fixed timeline. In his words, he had to do it since it wasn't Bertolt's time to die, and the official translation makes it clear that Eren made Dinah then go in the direction of his home. This is of course so that she can go to his house and eat his mother, and in the process put young Eren on the path he needs to go on. As I said in my review of the final chapter, it's not like future Eren wanted to do these things, it's just that he can't fight against a past and a future that was already predetermined. When he kissed Historia's hand, that was the first time he saw Dinah Fritz's memory of Bertolt from her perspective, and initially it was confusing why Eren was seeing this, but now we know why. In terms of the design of Eren's Founding Titan, it was quite easily the largest Titan in history, making even the Colossal look tiny by comparison. Its main body is nearly identical in shape to the Hallucigenia, and this is possibly due to the way this shifter was created. If we go back, when Eren and Zeke touched each other, Eren was just ahead, so this worm needed to create a brand new Titan body from scratch, with the end result being a bony creature similar to its own design. Each of these bones act like legs that slowly move forward, and at the very front of the body we have Eren himself. In my opinion, the overall design of this Titan is literally a metaphor for how he doesn't have any free will. Hear me out here, most of the body is in the shape of this ancient worm, which itself represents the power of the Founder. It was this same power that robbed Eren of his freedom, since it gave him an inevitable fate that he can never deviate from. At the front of the body, Eren presents himself as the one being in charge, but when we look at his arms, they're being held up by something. Just like a puppet on a string, Eren is being controlled by the Founding Titan, and the way his arms are hanging draw direct parallels with this. The string holding him up originates from the Hallucigenia, so it further hits home that he is simply a puppet of the Founding Titan. Moving on, the Coordinate's next ability was shown in the final battle, when it began resurrecting shifters from the past. These ancient titans were summoned by Ymir to defend Eren, and the story made it clear they weren't just mindless zombies. Although most of them did do what Ymir wanted, it really didn't take much convincing for others to switch sides and fight with the Alliance. Bertolt, Sava and Grisha, and also many other characters, they all rallied behind those who were trying to stop the rumbling, indicating that they did have some form of consciousness and were able to reject what Ymir wanted. Other powers include being able to replicate the form of any other Titan, evidenced when Eren himself made a brand new colossal body. This ability shouldn't be too surprising, given the way the Coordinate was used to make millions of Titans on a whim. However, it is still strange seeing Eren's head on this particular Titan. Towards the climax of Attack on Titan, it was also made very clear that if he wanted to, he could remove the shifter abilities from the other 8 Titans. Ultimately, he didn't do this since there was no other way they even had a chance of beating him, but the option was always there. In the penultimate chapter, the Hallucigenia produced a gas that turns Eldians into pure Titans, and this works on any subject except for Ackermans or Titan shifters. It's safe for us to assume the founders of the past could do a similar thing, as this is very likely where Marley got inspiration from to try it themselves. Final thing to mention before we end the video is that the real Eren was located in the mouth of his Founding Titan, and was connected to the body via his spine and these weird fleshy appendages. After Mikasa killed him, the symbiotic ancient worm also disappeared, putting a seemingly permanent end to the power of the Titans. As always, thank you guys for watching this video on all Founding Titans in history, and be sure to smash that sub button if you want to see more stuff like this. I'd also appreciate if you hit that like button as well, as it does help out the video, and until the next one, peace out.